Hi guys, welcome to Module 4 of Expert Strategies for Working with Anxiety. This is how to expand a client's tolerance for anxiety. It's by Stephen Hayes, Kelly McGonigal, Ron Siegel, and Ruth Bucztnski. Dr. B. I'm going to guess you probably weren't in practice long before you saw your first anxious client. Since then, you may have even lost track of the number of people you've seen for anxiety. Now, aside from the anxiety, what do all these people have in common? According to Dr. Stephen Hayes, it's often the way they think of getting better that's similar. And this thought, that treatment will make anxiety go away, can be exactly what holds the client back. Dr. Hayes. There's a tendency to think of anxiety as something that you must get through, get beyond, get over, control, learn how to control. Sometimes in their anxiety, people struggle and come in saying, I'm out of control. And from an ACT perspective, part of what I'm thinking is no, or an ACT perspective, whatever. No, actually what you need is you need to be out of control. Out of control is something that you express when you're inside a context that says your agenda is to be in control, and really, that's not so. Anxiety and all emotions have a place. They have a place in particular times and places. And yeah, it may be that it's not very livable to deal with anxiety the way you're dealing with it. I get that. But still, the anxiety is important. Dr. B. Anxiety is important. It's what can motivate us to work harder. It's often what gets us to really pay attention to our surroundings to avoid danger. It's what helps us look out for ourselves and the people we love. We don't want to get rid of anxiety altogether. So to help his clients understand that idea, Stephen poses a game-changing question. Dr. Hayes. I sometimes ask my clients, if we could make a deal and you knew nothing about anxiety, nothing about that at all, we just eliminate it, would you take that deal? And sometimes people are almost going to say something, but I say, wait a minute. Before you do, I just want to say one thing. And then I find something, someplace in their life where it's important. For example, you have children. What if I tell you just this one little thing, this one little cost? When your child comes to you and says that she's afraid or that she's anxious, you will have no idea what she's talking about. Are you going to take that deal? You're going to make that bargain with the devil? I've never seen anybody do it, of course. Anxiety doesn't feel pleasant, but people want to be in this anxiety-free universe without the cost that would come from that in terms of your insensitivity to the situations in which you get anxious. So instead of getting through, get beyond, get over, get out of, what if we get with? What would it be like if our job is to get with anxiety as it is, not as what it says it is, and see what is in that, and see what is in there that's of use to you. I really think it's an emotion that has healthy features to it. And as a person who has an anxiety disorder, a person in recovery, ACT or ACT exists because of my history of panic disorder in part. And I've learned that this is a constant agenda. I'm giving a talk at the Anxiety Disorders Association of America in about 2 weeks, and my head is filled with 1,000 people in a room. What if I can't talk? What if I get so anxious? 35 years into this ACT ACT journey, and thoughts like this come up. So here's what I say to clients. What if we could shift our measure from high and low anxiety to a different measure? Something like, is it possible to be kind to yourself even when you're anxious? Is it possible to have a goal of a little more freedom and a little more space to be yourself as a feeling, emotional human being with anxiety? You have anxiety, but along with all the other things you have too, including what you care about and what you're trying to do. When I go to give this talk, we'll see how it turns out. Maybe I'll just sit there and open my mouth and no sound will come out. That's possible. That actually is possible. But in that moment, the issue for me will be, can I be kind to myself? And can I open up a little more space for me to be me so that to the degree I'm able, I can do what I came here to do in the time I'm allocated on the planet? So it's kind of a process orientation as opposed to an outcome orientation that's measured by how many beats per minute or what your SUDS score is, and how many units of subjective discomfort. Oh, please. ACT ACT is an exposure-based technology, but it's exposure in a different way. It's values-based and it's willingness-focused. It's a process of openness, self-kindness, basically willingness to be there. Will you have me as I am? The answer is yes. That's what I mean by willingness, not an emotion, but the choice to be with yourself, which kind of opens that up. And then the other part is the values part. And the other part is the values part. In the service of what? In giving my talk there at the ADAA, it would be in the service of being able to bring what I've worked for 35 years to produce. Being able to bring what I've worked for 35 years to produce myself and hundreds, if not thousands of colleagues around the world into the hands of people who could use it to help people who are suffering. Dr. B. So from Stephen's perspective, treating anxiety is not about getting rid of anxiety. It's not about achieving an anxiety-free outcome. Instead, it's about a process that continues day after day. Stephen shared 2 questions that can help guide clients to engage with this process. First, is it possible to be more kind to yourself? And second, is it possible to open up a little more space for you to be you? Engaging with these questions during the experience of anxiety can help clients loosen the grip of anxiety on their lives. Now, Stephen shares a case that illustrates how to help a client find a new way to relate to anxiety. Dr. Hayes. I'm thinking of a client who was a competitive athlete and very strong-willed and just incredibly able to put himself through pain in the service of his athletic performance. But actually, behind the scenes and unbeknownst to the fans, he was living in a constant dialogue about how he was almost about to lose it and how he would say no to opportunities, not so much in athletic events, because once he got going, it was all fine. But in terms of all the kinds of things athletes have to do in the modern era, where they have to promote things and speak, and they have a public face in order to really be successful at a high level, and fulfill what sponsors want from you, and things like that. And that was a tremendous burden for him because you get into this constant chatter, which I know nothing about, of what would happen if this sort of mishandling of the future is part of what anxiety is the emotion of. But what I try to do is take what he had learned in his athletics and bring it over here, because what he had learned in athletics was that the outcome comes by focusing on the process, not by just focusing on the outcome. When you're going through training, you want to really fully be with yourself because you don't want to run through an injury. For example, you have to be able to read your body, but also have a little bit of separation there so that when things come up that are actually the normal part of the process of pushing out the boundaries a little bit physically, you don't stop. You hit the wall. You keep moving. But you also don't harm yourself. That requires a certain kind of mindfulness that weekend athletes tend not to have. They either just push through, or at the first twinge when they're stopping, and you're not going to improve. Dr. B. So just as you don't become a better athlete simply by setting a goal to win more, you don't treat anxiety by setting the goal to get rid of it. In athletics and anxiety, improvements come by focusing on the process. So how did this work out for Stephen's client? Dr. Hayes. So essentially, it was walking up to this choice point with him. of feeling anxious and then using these metrics of kindness and space. What can I do right here to open a little more space to be me? And then the metric then is, if I were to face this exact situation tomorrow, I'd be a little bigger. Not that I handled it magnificently well, not that I got applause. In the same way that you wouldn't say, not that you jumped 10 seconds forward in your best time. No, that's not likely to happen. Maybe half a second, but can you be a little more with yourself? So he reported, actually, an experience where he was in a situation where he had to interact with others and he had an opportunity to escape, and instead he said, I'm going to stay with it. In his role as a person of note, giving an interview with a reporter and opening up to that and having an experience. It was a playful opportunity to do something bigger there. It was a playful opportunity to do something there. And then there was a cascade where he realized, no matter how big I get, if I say yes, I'll get bigger. If I say yes, I'll get bigger. And he hit this kind of flow space that he knew from an athletic side that was almost euphoric. And he came back in session. I had to almost dampen him down, kind of hold him to the seat, because I remember him saying, no matter how big I get, I can get even bigger. I just need to say yes. What I had to caution him about is the mind's tendency to turn that into an outcome. That yes would mean I'm not going to be anxious. No, it does not mean that at all. I could tell you that as a 35-year-old journey as a panic disorder person in recovery, obviously in recovery, because it reminds me of the wisdom from the recovery traditions. This is not finished and gone. You're not like that. It allowed our work, which was really exposure work, basically, but exposure in the context of willingness and anxiety to be directed from this long-term thing of, I need to do this in order to, and sure enough, your mind is going to tell you in order to dampen down, get over with, control, get by, get through anxiety, instead to get present, to get with your anxiety and to grow just that tiny little bit that this moment affords, and then that this moment affords, and then that this moment affords. Let's see where it goes. I don't know how big you'll get. You don't either. Dr. B. As Stephen's example illustrates, learning to take a step into the unknown is one way to make more space for new experiences despite anxiety. This is an important idea that we'll come back to in Module 6. But now, for more insight into Stephen's approach, let's turn to Dr. Kelly McGonigal. Dr. M. To me, the story was really about going outside your comfort zone in the pursuit of something that matters to you. So I thought I'd turn in the metaphor that I use, that also comes from the body, that's about going outside your comfort zone when it matters. This comes from the field of yoga. And so, as anyone who's ever done yoga knows, when you first do a stretch, it typically is painful and uncomfortable. And the body will read it as danger, like this can't be safe because it doesn't feel good. And that's because the way that you feel a stretch is through nociception. Nociception. Literally like sensing harm. It's the sensory neurons that sense threat, that tell you that you are stretching your muscles and your connective tissue. But if you actually approach it with a certain level of acceptance and self-trust and mindfulness and commitment to the process, the actual sensation changes, and it changes over time the more you do it. And what we know from the science of sensation is the same sensory neurons that are important for nociception are also important for Beneception, Beneception, Ception, which nobody talks about, but it's the sense that something good is happening in my body right now. That's different than like something tastes good. That something actually feels healing and positive, and I should do more of it. When you're in a yoga pose and you actually go from feeling pain to bliss, that's what's happening. And I think that you can think about that. And I think that you can think about that for having to go outside your comfort zone when you're anxious as well, to actually let people know it's going to be uncomfortable. You're going to have these messages that say this is not safe, but you've thought about this and you've decided that this is going to be an important stretch for you, and you're willing to go to your edge, knowing that it will transform you, and that people actually report feeling pleasure in that process. Literally, people enjoy the process of going outside their comfort zone over time, but it takes some practice. So that's a metaphor I like to use. Dr. B. So when a client joins with the process, whether it's a new yoga stretch or a situation that evokes anxiety, they might begin to feel pleasure where there was once discomfort. And we'll build on this in Module 5, when we explore how something we may often do with clients could be the very thing that's keeping them from joining with their anxiety. Now, once a client has made positive steps to be with their anxiety, how do we know when enough's enough with therapy? Here are Doctors Ron Siegel and Kelly McGonigal. Dr. Siegel, yes. What's enough? In the therapy realm, is always a very interesting question, because there are some people who will get a little bit of relief from something and will say, oh, done with that, and they'll want out. And other people where it just whets their appetite for curiosity about understanding the heart and the mind more. And then, of course, there are therapists who, as soon as they get some symptom relief, they're done with that. And then there are others who say, well, this is the beginning of a lifelong relationship. Let's keep going. So I think the endpoint actually depends a lot on what people are looking for and how they understand the relationship and the like. But I think there's another point that Steve made in this, which was this turning process into an outcome, which has to do with what might otherwise be called cheating, which is using acceptance in the service of getting rid of something. Where you say, I'm going to go out with where you say, I'm going to go with the process. I'm going to accept my public speaking anxiety, my insomnia, my sexual dysfunction, or whatever it is, so that it'll go away. And this is really just fascinating, just how quickly the mind will turn the process into something to try to hold on to cling to, and not to see it as an ongoing journey. There are great studies that Judd, J-U-D, Brewer at the University of Massachusetts Medical Center is doing, looking at the posterior cingulate, C-I-N-G-U-L-A-T-E, cortex, which is a part of the brain that seems to get activated whenever we have the thought of, I got it, or it's going well, or this is good. And they're setting people up to meditate and to see if they can quiet this part of the brain. And of course, the second that the person actually gets into the flow of it, let's go of attachment to outcome. And of course, the second that the person actually gets into the flow of it, let's go of attachment to outcome, they go, oh, I got it. And then there's a spike. It's activated. And he's seeing graphically what we all know, which is that it's very hard to just stay in process mode and not immediately get very attached to any pleasant outcome. And yet that does seem to be what life requires of us. Dr. M. Well, it depends. If you're seeking enlightenment or you're seeking some sort of relief from suicidal ideation and great despair, I've been led towards more/greater acceptance of the importance of a sort of celebration and marking positive moments along the way of a journey of progress. It has been pointed out to me through direct experiences of individuals how important that is. That's different than being obsessed about outcomes. So let's say progress rather than progress and process do not have to / are not necessarily anti-ethical, THETICAL, in the same way that outcomes versus process are. Dr. Siegel. Yes, I think this is why it's going to have several different eyes. Yes, Dr. Siegel. Yes, I think this is why it's good to have several different eyes and ears on each of these matters. I agree with you about all of this. There are the much more micro moments that I'm thinking about, like when you start to drift off to sleep after you've been afraid of not getting enough sleep, and you think, oh, goody, I'm falling asleep, and that wakes you up. I was thinking in a much more micro kind of analysis as opposed to the bigger picture that you're talking about, which is absolutely, celebrating that, hey, I can now walk up to people and ask them for a cup of coffee. Far out. That's wonderful. Dr. B. As Stephen said at the beginning of this module, if we could help clients open up a bit more space to be with their anxiety, they can find more freedom. Coming up in the next module, we'll go back to the discussion of how people cope with anxiety, but we'll get into what happens when those coping strategies begin to hold our clients back. I'll see you there.